Hi. For those of you who don't know me, my name's James Pudner. I'm the treasurer of the Celestina Masters Homeowners Association. I won't do this every year, but given the gravity of some of the items in this year's budget, I thought it would be helpful to send out a video walking through the presentation for those of you who were not able to make the meeting tonight. I appreciate all the feedback and the attendance and everybody who was able to, and I understand this is a very hot item. Everybody's interested in where our assessments are going to be, why they are what they are. So again, just wanted to take the time to walk through what happened this year and why we're looking at what we are. So I'll start just from the background. As everybody is well aware, we had the highest inflation in 4 decades in the past year. And while that is great for our home values, it is not great for the HOA. On top of just normal high inflations, the the costs that are most impactful to the HOA were impacted even more than just your standard inflation rates you've seen. Those being utilities, which have seen 25% inflation over the last year, and contractor costs, which have gone up almost as high. So obviously, those are the two biggest operating costs of an HOA, and so we are not immune. We've had to deal with a lot of that, and I'll go through a lot of these numbers so you can see what happened there. That's issue number one in 2023. Issue number two is related to our reserves. So I'll go through both of those. I'll kind of refer back to certain slides, but this presentation I'm sending out to as well with the video. So you'll have all this detail. I may not touch on every number here, but happy to answer any questions. I think our emails are all public. It's jamesp@celestinahoa.com. On Facebook, I'm there as well. Happy to answer any questions or walk through any concerns from anybody. So first, I'll be referring back to this slide, but this is our bridge from 2022 budget to 2023. I'll touch on these big items, at least some, but as you can see, we started at 894 for operating. We had some one-time projects that were approved in 2022 that are obviously not going to be part of our next year's budget, so that's a favorable change. We have this legal issue with Lennar that I'll talk a lot more about. And then we have these two, which are really inflation. The way I would view these are this amount is our 2022 inflation over our 2021 budget. And this amount is additional inflation that's happened kind of at the end of 2022 and is bleeding into 2023. So together, inflation obviously is a huge part. And I'm sorry, I'll take one more step back. For those of you who don't know, HOAs have two major responsibilities: the operating budget, which is your everyday, the cost of Vesta, any small repairs, utilities, all those types of costs go into our operating budget. And then you've got your reserves, which are to cover anything that is over $10,000. You're required to have reserves set up. And the reason for that is, say we have to repair our roads for $500,000. If we don't have a reserve established that we've been funding for a period of time, that would be a special assessment, a one-time just fee for every resident of around $800. So, and don't check my math on those, just to give you an idea of why you have reserves set up. So these are our two budgets. And again, I'll refer back to these slides to kind of bridge what happened between 2022 and 2023. The slide before this is our overview of our 2023 budget. So these are going to be the final numbers, not to spoil the answer here at the beginning, but we'll talk a lot about what changed in 2022. So stepping down to this operating budget, again, the biggest driver here is inflation. So we compared our 2022 actuals through September and then forecasted out the rest of the year compared to our budget, and you can just see how hard we've been hit. Our 2022 actuals are 68,000 unfavorable to budget, driven by inflation, particularly in contractor costs, which is our repairs and maintenance, about 38,000 impact, and then utilities, which everybody has seen this on your JEA bills. We're 40,000 over budget there. So again, that is a huge impact on our 2022. That is going to continue to impact us in 2023. We had some other items that were favorable that we didn't spend this year. We had budgeted, so that brings it down a little bit to the 68,000. Then on top of that, our 2023 costs are going to increase even more in certain areas over what they've been in 2022. The big items here are landscaping. is about 25,000 more than it was in 2022. And we did go out for bid, and I think we got 5 or 6 proposals, and all of them are comparable. Just the cost of mulch, fertilizer, employees, all these costs are going up. And so we are having to pay for that in our 2023. And then our insurance has gone up 22,000 over 2022. And you've probably all seen this in your personal insurance policies as well. Florida is just getting hammered here. Insurers are leaving the state. It's just too high risk with the weather and everything else. So insurance is over doubling to 22,000 more than it was last year. Next, we've got 16,000 more in 2023 for the full-time guard. As you recall, we closed the gates 24/7 early this year around March or April. And so we were only paying for a full-time guard for 9 months. Next year, obviously, that'll be full year. It's another big impact. And then this is the one-time item that we've got in our 2023 budget that I'll talk a lot more about, but we are pursuing legal action against Lennar for several items. So those are our operating, coming back to you, these are our operating negatives. So we started with a budget of 894 in 2022, removed those one-time costs that we had for capital improvements. This would be the Westgate improvement, the basketball court resurfacing, a new hoop. There's another big, the virtual guard, the gate access system. So these are all no longer part of the budget. And then we have the one-time legal fees that I'll talk about, and then the inflation. That's how you should view this. So overall, before this reclass that I'll talk about, we had an increase of 7% in our operating budget from 2022 to 2023. So obviously that's a lot, but it's not terrible when you consider that we've had 15% inflation in all of our costs and 25% in some of the more significant HOA expenses. So now moving on to reserves. Some background, as I mentioned at the beginning, per Florida state law, you're required to have sufficient reserve set up for any capital replacement costs over $10,000. Again, the reason for that is so you don't have special assessments, don't have an issue where a road is damaged and it's not safe to drive on and you can't fund it because people aren't paying special assessments, or there's a huge fee to all residents, or a resident moves in and then immediately gets hit with an $800 special assessment when they weren't the ones driving on the road for the last 10 years. So anyways, we've got reserves that have to be established. Early in the year, I took a look at the reserves that Lennar had estimated and that we'd been funding based on their calculations. And I talked to Scott and the other board members and said, I think we've got an issue. There were a lot of assets that I know were more than $10,000 that were just not included. And then the ones that were included looked really low. So we had already been planning on getting a reserve firm, a reserve specialist, to come out and perform a study. This is engineers and finance people who look at your assets, take pictures, and get quotes and tell you what your costs are going to be when you replace them, give you an estimated life. You do a full study to tell us what our reserves should be and need to be per Florida state law. So we undertook that this year. And as you can see in just this note, Lennar was way off. So that's the other big factor impacting our assessments this year. It's inflation in the operating, and then reserves, just Lennar, screwing us. So here are some of the numbers of the reserve underfunding. Lennar had been underestimating our reserve costs by about $133,000 per year. That's about $500,000 life to date. It goes back to whenever the asset was built. So obviously in 2014, 2015, we didn't have everything yet, so we shouldn't have had reserves for all of these assets. That's why it's not just 130,000 times 7 years or however old the community is, but significant underfunding. Of the assets that Lennar had identified, the clubhouse, the pool, and the roads, they were off by $87,000 a year. So 36% of the required funding was being completed for those assets. And then they just completely omitted a ton of other stuff. Fitness equipment, the stormwater drainage is a very big expense that we have to do every once in a while as those get clogged up. The guardhouse, the recreational facilities. So this is the playground, the courts, resurfacing the courts, and then several other things. The lights, around the fencing. So they just missed a lot of stuff. What we are looking at now is how to hold them accountable for this. One thing to keep in mind is this isn't necessarily expense that Lennar should have paid us. It should have been paid through assessments in prior years. So partially funded by Lennar for all the houses they haven't sold yet, but mostly funded by residents. So this is really just a reset. Now we are trying to hold them accountable for this big catch up that we have now. But their argument is going to be, yeah, we were off, but it should have been from residents anyway, so who cares if it's later? We're going to fight that, but just want to give you a heads up. This isn't like a $500,000 check that I'm expecting will be able to make them right. So here's the dispute. At the end of, it actually was the end of 2020. It was the last year we had an audit complete. Lennar said that it owed Celestina $217,000. We already thought this was too low, again, because of the reserves that were underfunded, partially part of which should have been paid by Lennar. The West Gate, the original West Gate, the road and the bars that are there right now, we paid for, Vesta paid for by the HOA. And that should have been a Lennar expense. So we've been trying to get that back from them and haven't been able to yet. And then they were supposed to pay this amount or whatever amount is correct to us in April. And we are just now getting their audit to tell us what they owe. So we were waiting for the turnover audit to be complete, which we were hoping would say, yeah, this 217,000 is not right. It should be 300, 400, whatever the number ends up being. Unfortunately, the hand-picked auditor from Lennar came back and said, actually, it shouldn't be 217, it should be 149. So they're going down. So we had a meeting with the attorney this week to discuss what our next steps are going to be and how we can file suit and hopefully get some damages from them for their underfunding and for other things that we paid on their behalf. So this is what is driving the 15,000 one-time expenses in our 2023 budget. Obviously, the amounts here, it would be well worth it if we can get some of these funds back for around that amount. So again, I understand this. I'll refer back to you. This is our. Oh, I'm sorry. One last thing I want to mention. So of the reserves, we did a study and they told us this is the amount you have to fund each year. The low end we were able to get to was $183,000 a year. Lennar had been saying it should be $50,000 a year. Now, in this number, there were some things that we say maybe we were previously paying for some of these items out of operating before. So what we did is we said we combed through all the details of our operating, spent a lot of time looking through our expenses in 2022 invoices to say what could we make an argument is a reserve expense going forward. And by doing that, we were able to remove $66,000 of our operating budget that we say are now covered in this $183,000 of the reserve. So this when I'm looking at the percentage increases here, that excludes this reclass for both of them, because that's moving from operating to reserve. So if you look at our final budget in operating for 2023, it's actually comes out to the same number rounded as 2022. But that's, again, I would view it before this reclass. Really, this is our operating change. So again, I understand this is where our fees are going to be, and nobody likes assessment increases. We're all feeling this pain. HOA board members are not, we're not exempt from this. We are paying this as well, and we hear feedback. We understand nobody wants fees to go up, especially when there's no capital improvements to come with it. Last year, we had an increase because there was an overwhelmingly high support for certain improvements, like the West Gate being improved, the second basketball hoop, having the gate access guard app to let guests in so that we don't have those issues at the gate. This year, that's not what's happening. We don't have a whole lot of new capital stuff we're moving forward with. This is just the cost of doing business. So I understand it's painful. I understand these are your dollars. This is not like a joke. We are all feeling this pain. And so we did everything we could to keep this as low as possible. Some of the things we did, so when we got the first draft of the reserve study back, we said, whoa, we've got an issue here. And then we went through item by item. There's probably 100 different assets or components of assets that are included there, and said, is there any wiggle room here? Can we stretch this out over a longer period of time? What can we do here? And we're able to get down to we asked the advisors to give us the low end of the range of all these replacement cost estimates and the high end of the estimated life. So spreading it out as far as possible. And we were able to reduce our reserve budget by $35,000 by doing that. So that's about $4 of monthly assessments that we were able to reduce from the original reserve study we got. The other thing we did is In the earlier meetings this year, we talked about earmarking certain income, like the rentals for the amenity center, to help contribute to the reserve, so we can pay for furniture replacements and repairs in the clubhouse through that rental income. So we're doing that. So that impacted our budget by 10,000. Again, reducing our assessments by about $1.50 a month. Then, as I mentioned, once we got the reserve study, we combed through our operating budget, every line item, every invoice that was significant, and said what could possibly be paid for out of reserves going forward. By doing that, we were able to reduce our operating budget by 66,000, so a very meaningful change in our monthly assessments. The next thing we're doing, as mentioned, we're working with an attorney to sue Lennar. So that's unfavorable to the budget this year because we have to pay the legal fees. It's about $1 or $2, probably about $2 of assessments this year. But the final benefit should be much better than that. It should help us offset future assessments. And then again, the increase this year is not driven by capital improvements. We are deferring every capital project we have. There are a lot of things that we would like to do that are not included in this number. The 17,000 is something that we know we have to do, but we're not doing it this year because we talked about it and we said people are going to be feeling the pain of this increase. Probably not the right time to do something. So this 17,000 is for phasing out the gate remotes that are not compatible with our gates. We eventually have to get a system that's compatible so we don't keep having these failures. But we said, let's not do that this year. There's too big of an increase already. And then the last thing we do, and Scott is huge in this and has been since the beginning. Every time we get an invoice that looks high or a contract renewal that comes in higher, we dig into it, especially, like I said, Scott, what I'll do is I'll go through the financial statements, and if there's an unexpected bump, I'll ask questions and I'll dig into invoices then. But Scott's having lots of discussions with our vendors, with Vesta, and just fighting costs. We didn't go through and tally up all the wins we had this year, but this is the best we can do to reduce our costs as well. We go and get bids when things look high, and again, we're trying to keep these as low as possible while maintaining the community. So I'll finish. I won't read the whole slide. You all have it, but just a message from us is, again, reiterating, we are doing everything we can to limit the cost. We understand this is painful. This is not this is not just a game with numbers. This is your dollars, and we are trying to keep the cost as low as possible. Unfortunately, just with the Lennar reserve issue and the inflation, we just have a reset. Our fees just need to be reset, especially with the reserves. So that's how I would view this. Our fees are going to be about 140, and then in the future, any increases would be because of continued inflation above what's expected, or if we decide to, based on community feedback, to improve a capital project or to do something to add a new amenity or something like that. But this year, this is just resetting our baseline. Do want to highlight that we did some research around and said, what are other communities? And the reason we use these comparables is because, as you may know, you probably know, if you have a gate, immediately your roads become private and you're responsible for funding those. If you don't have a gate, they're public roads and the city takes care of them. So that's why we pulled a couple other gated communities to see what their fees were, and we are still low. Julington Lakes is $148 a month, and they don't pay guards. That's $100,000 a year that we pay to have a guard there 24/7. St. John's Forest, who does have a guard or guards, I forget. They pay $166 a month, so we're going to be at 140, and that is still low. So just want to highlight that we're doing what we can. Again, I understand this is not what people want to hear. You're getting hit with inflation on all of your bills, and you didn't want something on top of that for the HOA. But unfortunately, it's just the reality of the situation. So this is where our budget's going to be in 2023. Happy to answer any questions, again, via email, Facebook. Come knock on my door. Just don't disrupt the kids during nap time. And we'll continue to work to keep our fees as low as possible and listen to resident feedback. So thank you, everybody, for your time.